You are not here to chase, to beg, or to shrink your soul to fit into someone else's emotional limitations. You are here to remember who you are. When you obsess over someone who avoids intimacy, avoids truth, avoids depth, something subtle but powerful happens. The energy shifts. Obsession feels like weakness on the surface, but beneath it lies an intense emotional investment. And energy, once withdrawn, does not disappear. It returns to its source. The moment you stop trying to be seen by someone committed to not seeing you, your awareness sharpens. You begin to observe instead of react. You begin to choose yourself. And in that moment, the avoidant feels something unfamiliar, the loss of control. Not because you punished them, but because you reclaimed your presence. Power was never in pursuit. Power was always in self-recognition. Silence is not emptiness. Silence is a mirror. When you stop explaining, stop proving, stop reaching, the avoidant is left alone with their own reflection. And for someone who has built a life around emotional escape, this is deeply unsettling. Your absence becomes louder than your words ever were. Detachment is not cruelty, it is clarity. It reveals truth without argument. As divine principles teach us, what is meant for you cannot be chased. It aligns. When you withdraw your energy with dignity, the avoidant begins to feel the weight of what they dismissed. Regret does not arrive dramatically. It arrives quietly in moments of stillness they once avoided. An avoidant thrives on emotional availability without responsibility. They take comfort in knowing you are there, even if they never fully show up. But when that emotional supply disappears, a vacuum is created, and nature abhors a vacuum. Suddenly, the warmth they took for granted is gone. The validation they passively received has vanished. This is when loss becomes real. Not theoretical, not intellectual, real. They begin to notice your absence in ordinary places, moments where your presence once softened their world. Regret begins as confusion. Why do I feel unsettled? Because something sacred was removed, and it was not removed in anger, it was removed in alignment. Avoidance delays pain, it never eliminates it. When there is no longer someone reaching out, no longer someone waiting, no longer someone holding emotional space, the avoidant is forced inward. And inside, there is emptiness they have been running from their entire lives. This is the stage where realization dawns slowly. They begin to connect dots they ignored. They replay moments where they chose distance over depth. This is not your doing, this is consequence. Divine law is simple. What you neglect teaches you through absence. Regret deepens here because now they understand, too late, that safety was offered, and they walked away. Regret, when it finally matures, becomes a teacher. Not all regret seeks reconciliation. Some regret seeks wisdom. The avoidant begins to see that control is an illusion, that emotional withdrawal costs more than vulnerability ever did. Whether they reach out or remain silent is no longer your concern. Your transformation has already occurred. You are no longer obsessed, you are awake. And awakening is the greatest return on pain. You did not lose them, you found yourself. And in divine order, when you choose yourself, life rearranges to honor that choice. Some people realize your value when they lose access to you. Others never do. But both outcomes serve your growth. Because you were never meant to be a lesson in regret, you were meant to be a reminder of love, depth, and truth. At first, obsession feels like surrender. It feels like giving your power away, like placing your emotional center in someone else's hands. You replay conversations, analyze silences, and search for meaning in what was never clearly given. But something unexpected begins to happen beneath the surface. Obsession, when it reaches its breaking point, turns inward. It forces awareness. It brings you face to face with the truth of where your energy is flowing. And awareness is the beginning of power. The moment you recognize how much of yourself you have been pouring into someone who cannot meet you there, a quiet shift begins. You start to see the imbalance, not emotionally, but clearly. The avoidant often believes distance gives them control. They pull back, knowing you will lean forward. They stay vague, knowing you will seek clarity. For a time, this dynamic feels fixed. But obsession cannot sustain itself forever. Emotional exhaustion sets in, and exhaustion strips illusion away. You begin to realize that your constant reaching has not brought closeness, only further distance. This realization is not painful in the way rejection is painful, it is sobering. It wakes you up. You start to notice how your life, Your peace and your sense of worth have been orbiting someone else's inability to connect. And the moment you see this, the power begins to move back toward you. As your awareness grows, your behavior changes without force. You stop reacting as quickly, you stop over-explaining. You pause before responding. These pauses are subtle, but they are powerful. The avoidant feels them immediately. What once felt predictable now feels uncertain. Not because you are playing games, but because you are no longer abandoning yourself to maintain connection. This is where the energetic shift occurs. Power was never about dominance, it was about self-possession. When you reclaim your attention, your emotional world becomes less accessible to someone who never fully valued it. There is a deeper principle at work here, one rooted in spiritual law: energy follows attention. When your attention is consumed by someone else, your life contracts around them. But when awareness pulls your attention back home, expansion begins. You remember your values. You reconnect with your purpose. You start asking better questions, not about them, but about yourself. What do I need? What do I tolerate? What am I being asked to learn? These questions restore alignment, and alignment naturally dissolves unhealthy attachment. The avoidant senses this shift not through logic, but through loss of influence. They may not understand why, but they feel it. Your presence feels different. Your absence feels heavier. What once required little effort from them now feels unavailable. This is not punishment, it is consequence. When you stop chasing clarity from someone committed to confusion, you stop feeding the dynamic that allowed avoidance to thrive. And in that vacuum, the avoidant begins to experience discomfort. Control slips away, not because you took it, but because you no longer offered it. Most importantly, this shift transforms you regardless of what the avoidant does next. Your sense of worth detaches from their responses. You no longer measure your value by how quickly they reply or how emotionally open they become. You begin to understand a divine truth: love that costs you your peace is not love, it is a lesson. And this lesson returns your power by reminding you that you were never meant to convince someone of your worth. The moment you see that clearly, obsession dissolves into self-awareness, and self-awareness becomes freedom. When silence enters the space between two people, it can feel like an empty void waiting to be filled, but in truth, silence is far more profound than mere absence of sound. It acts as a mirror reflecting not only what is present, but also what has been hidden beneath layers of words and distractions. For someone who habitually avoids emotional closeness, silence is often their refuge. A way to maintain distance, avoid vulnerability, and protect themselves from perceived threats. However, when the one who has been chasing steps back, choosing silence not out of avoidance but out of self-respect, this silence no longer functions as a shield. Instead, it becomes a powerful reflection, a quiet confrontation with the reality they have long evaded. Silence strips away the noise and distractions that once masked discomfort. When you stop explaining yourself, stop pleading for connection, and stop trying to fill every gap with words, you create a space where truth can surface. The avoidant, who may have relied on your energy to smooth over their emotional gaps, now faces an unfamiliar emptiness. This emptiness is not something they can easily dismiss or control. It presses in, subtle at first, then more insistently. In this silence, the avoidant begins to hear the echoes of what was left unsaid, the moments when you offered closeness but were met with withdrawal, the warmth you sought, but they withheld. The silence becomes a mirror reflecting not just their actions, but the impact those actions have had on someone who cared deeply. This reflection is unsettling because avoidance is often rooted in fear: fear of intimacy, fear of being overwhelmed, fear of losing autonomy. Silence forces the avoidant to sit with these fears without the usual distractions. It invites them to feel the absence they have created, not as a theoretical concept, but as a tangible experience. The quiet space you hold is not emptiness, it is presence, your presence in its truest form, free from desperation or compromise. This presence challenges the avoidant's comfort zone, stirring feelings they may have suppressed or denied. They begin to sense the gravity of what was dismissed, the subtle pain behind your withdrawal, and the consequences of their emotional distance. The process is gradual, often unconscious. Regret does not announce itself with fanfare but creeps in quietly during moments of solitude. It surfaces in thoughts, in memories replayed with new understanding, in the awareness of missed opportunities to connect more deeply. This regret is not simply about losing someone, it is about recognizing the cost of avoidance, the loneliness that comes from building walls instead of bridges. The silence you maintain acts like a sacred space where this recognition can grow, where avoidance can no longer hide behind distraction or denial. Moreover, silence teaches a vital lesson about boundaries and self-worth. It demonstrates that love does not require constant pursuit or justification. When you hold your silence firmly, you communicate that your presence is not guaranteed by default, but is a gift offered with dignity. This subtle message shakes the foundation of avoidance because it reveals that emotional distance has consequences beyond the surface. It awakens a new awareness in the avoidant, not just about what they lose externally, but about what they risk losing internally. The chance to experience genuine connection, the chance to grow through vulnerability. In this way, silence is both a mirror and a teacher. It reveals the truth without accusation or blame, leaving space for the avoidant to confront their role in the dynamic. It offers an opportunity for transformation, but only if they are willing to face what they have long evaded. Meanwhile, for you, the one who chooses silence, it is an act of self-empowerment. It signals that you will no longer sacrifice your peace for the sake of someone else's fears. The silence you keep is a declaration that your worth is not dependent on someone else's readiness to embrace you. It is a sacred boundary, a refuge of strength, and a catalyst for awakening regret that may one day lead to change. When emotional availability suddenly disappears, the one who has long relied on it is confronted with a reality they may have never fully grasped before. For someone who habitually avoids deep connection, the presence of consistent emotional supply, from attention, validation, or availability, often feels like a safety net, even if they never fully engage with it. It is a silent agreement. You are there when needed, yet you don't push for more than what they are willing to give. This dynamic can lull the avoidant into complacency, a state where emotional detachment feels comfortable because the reassurance is always there, just beyond reach but never fully absent. However, the moment you withdraw that emotional supply, whether by choice or necessity, a profound shift occurs. The avoidant is no longer able to rely on the steady, predictable presence that buffered their fears and insecurities. Suddenly, the emotional space they once took for granted is empty. This emptiness is not simply a physical absence. It is a loss of control over the emotional environment they had learned to manipulate or sidestep. Without this safety net, they are forced to experience vulnerability in a way they previously avoided. This experience shakes the foundation of their emotional defenses. Loss, in this context, is not about dramatic upheaval or confrontation. It is about the quiet disappearance of what once felt assured. The avoidant begins to notice the subtle but powerful absence in daily life, the missed texts, the unanswered calls, the lack of reassurance that used to arrive like clockwork. These small voids accumulate into a growing awareness that something essential has changed. The emotional currency they took for granted is no longer available, and with it, their sense of safety and predictability dissolves. This absence can trigger confusion and discomfort, emotions that the avoidant is often ill-equipped to handle because they disrupt their carefully maintained detachment. What follows is a process of reckoning. The avoidant begins to confront the consequences of their emotional withdrawal. They see, perhaps for the first time, the impact their avoidance has had, not just on the other person but on themselves. The loss they experience is not merely external, it is internal as well. Without the constant presence of someone willing to bridge the emotional gap, they face an unfiltered reflection of their own loneliness and fear. This confrontation is painful because it strips away the distractions and defenses they relied on to avoid true connection. Regret often emerges during this stage, not as an immediate reaction, but as a slow dawning realization. It arises in moments when the avoidant feels the weight of what they no longer have, the connection they never fully embraced, and the warmth they once dismissed. This regret can be deeply transformative because it carries the seeds of self-awareness. It invites the avoidant to question their patterns, their fears, and the cost of their emotional distance. The loss becomes a catalyst for introspection, a turning point where avoidance begins to be understood as a barrier to genuine fulfillment. Yet, this stage is delicate. The avoidant may respond with denial, resistance, or further withdrawal, fearing that vulnerability will only lead to pain. The emotional supply's disappearance creates a vacuum that is difficult to navigate, and without support or insight, they may retreat even further. However, if the avoidant can sit with this loss and allow regret to deepen into understanding, a new path can open. This path leads to a recognition that emotional connection is not a threat, but a source of healing and growth. Ultimately, the avoidant's confrontation with loss is an invitation to evolve. It is a reminder that emotional supply, when given freely and without conditions, is a gift, not a weakness or a trap. When this gift is withdrawn, it forces the avoidant to reckon with their own needs and fears. It is a powerful moment of truth that, if embraced, can dissolve old patterns of avoidance and open the door to authentic connection. The loss of emotional supply does not mark an end, it marks the beginning of deeper awareness and the possibility of transformation. Avoidance is often a strategy to keep pain at bay, a way to delay the difficult feelings that arise from vulnerability, intimacy, or loss. But no matter how skillfully avoidance is practiced, it cannot eliminate the inner emptiness that grows quietly beneath the surface. When the external distractions and emotional supplies are removed, the avoidant is left alone with themselves, their fears, their doubts, their unspoken longings. This forced solitude becomes a crucible for reflection, a space where delayed realization begins to take root. At first, this emptiness may be met with resistance. The avoidant may feel restless, uneasy, or compelled to fill the void with busyness or distraction. Yet, these attempts only scratch the surface. The deeper truth waits patiently beneath all the noise. When external stimuli no longer suffice, the avoidant is confronted with an unvarnished internal landscape. It is here, in this stark space, that reflection begins, not the superficial kind that reassures avoidance, but the profound kind that challenges old habits and beliefs. This stage is marked by a gradual awareness that what has been avoided is not going away. The feelings, once buried or ignored, start to surface as subtle, persistent echoes. Regret often accompanies this reflection, not as a sudden epiphany, but as a slow, dawning understanding. The avoidant begins to connect past choices to present loneliness. They see moments when emotional distance was chosen over connection, not because connection was unwanted, but because it felt too risky. This realization is painful because it reveals a pattern that has shaped their life and relationships in ways they may not have fully acknowledged. Inner emptiness serves as a mirror revealing the cost of avoidance. It shows the opportunities lost, the connections never fully made, and the intimacy never truly embraced. But it also carries the potential for healing. Reflection in this emptiness can lead to compassion for oneself, the recognition that avoidance was a protective mechanism, not a character flaw. This compassion opens the door to curiosity. What is fear really trying to protect? What needs remain unmet? What would happen if vulnerability were no longer avoided but welcomed? The process of delayed realization is transformative because it shifts the avoidant from unconscious patterns to conscious awareness. It is no longer about running from feelings but about facing them with courage. The emptiness that once seemed threatening becomes a space for growth and change. It invites the avoidant to explore new ways of relating to themselves and others, to experiment with vulnerability, and to risk connection despite the fear. However, this journey is not linear or guaranteed. The avoidant may cycle through denial, confusion, and resistance multiple times before acceptance deepens. The emptiness may feel overwhelming or unbearable, prompting a retreat back into old defenses. But each encounter with this inner void chips away at avoidance, gradually softening its grip. This stage also reveals a profound spiritual principle, that true growth often emerges from emptiness. Just as a seed must be buried in dark soil to sprout, emotional growth requires surrendering old patterns and sitting with discomfort. The avoidant's inner emptiness is fertile ground for new awareness, new habits, and new relationships rooted in authenticity. Ultimately, delayed realization invites the avoidant to awaken from the illusion that avoidance protects them. It calls them to reclaim their emotional wholeness, to embrace the fullness of human experience, including pain, longing, and connection. The emptiness is not a void to be feared, but a doorway to transformation. And when this door opens, the avoidant begins to move from isolation to intimacy, from fear to love, and from avoidance to presence. Regret is often misunderstood as a purely negative emotion, a burden to carry or a source of pain to avoid. Yet, within the deeper wisdom of life's unfolding, regret can be one of the most profound teachers we encounter. For someone who has lived in avoidance, who has kept emotional walls high and distance firm, regret arrives as a subtle but powerful messenger. It is not merely about feeling sorrow for lost opportunities or missed connections. It is about the awakening of awareness that control was never truly in their hands. This awakening holds the key to transformation. When control is sought through avoidance, through emotional withdrawal or detachment, it is often done with the hope of protecting oneself from vulnerability, from being hurt or overwhelmed. But control, in this sense, is an illusion. It creates a false sense of safety that ultimately isolates and disconnects. Regret steps in precisely when that illusion begins to crumble. The avoidant realizes that no amount of distance or silence can shield them from the essential human need for connection. This realization may be slow and reluctant, but it is deeply transformative because it reveals the truth that was always there beneath avoidance, that emotional presence cannot be controlled, only experienced. In this stage, regret becomes a teacher by guiding the avoidant to see their patterns without judgment. It asks them to face the consequences of emotional withdrawal, not as punishment, but as natural outcomes of their choices. The teacher within regret encourages self-reflection, inviting questions such as, what have I truly gained by keeping others at a distance, and what have I lost in the process? These questions are not meant to instill guilt, but to open the heart to greater understanding. Through this reflection, the avoidant begins to perceive the cost of control and the value of surrender. Control often feels like power, but in reality, it is a subtle form of imprisonment. The avoidant may have convinced themselves that by staying distant, they maintain independence and safety. However, regret reveals that this control restricts growth and stifles genuine connection. True freedom, the kind that leads to fulfillment and love, arises not from control but from vulnerability, and openness to be seen and known without guarantees. Regret, as a teacher, points to this paradox, nudging the avoidant toward the courage needed to let go. When control is no longer possible, the avoidant faces a pivotal crossroads. They can choose to continue resisting vulnerability, reinforcing the walls of avoidance, or they can allow regret to guide them toward healing. This healing does not require perfection or immediate change, but calls for honest presence with one's emotions and experiences. It asks the avoidant to hold their regret with compassion, recognizing it as a sign of growth rather than failure. This stage of regret also aligns with divine principles of transformation. Many spiritual traditions teach that surrender is the path to true power. To surrender is not to give up, but to relinquish the illusion of control over what cannot be controlled, the hearts and emotions of others, the unfolding of relationships, and the unpredictable nature of life itself. Regret teaches that control is a form of resistance to this surrender, and by embracing regret, the avoidant moves closer to acceptance, peace, and authentic connection. Ultimately, regret is not the end of the story. It is a beginning, the beginning of a new way of relating to oneself and others. The avoidant learns that the walls built for protection can be softened, and that vulnerability is not weakness but strength. Through regret, they discover that love cannot be managed or commanded. It can only be invited and received. And in this invitation lies the possibility of transformation, not just for the avoidant but for everyone touched by their journey. Regret, then, becomes a sacred teacher, guiding the avoidant from illusion to truth, from separation to unity, and from control to freedom. It is through this painful but profound lesson that true healing begins, opening the way to deeper connection, greater compassion, and the fullness of life itself. Thank you for your time and openness to this journey of understanding. Wishing you strength and clarity as you walk your path. Goodbye and take care. In the end, obsession over someone who avoids closeness is not about them. It is a profound invitation to awaken within yourself. It is through the stages of shifting power, facing silence, confronting loss, embracing emptiness, and learning from regret that transformation unfolds. You are called to reclaim your own worth, to honor your peace, and to step into a deeper love that begins with self-awareness and self-respect. Remember, true connection cannot be forced or controlled. It blooms only when both hearts are ready. Your journey is not about fixing another, but about embracing your own growth, your own awakening, and your own freedom. Thank you for allowing me to share these reflections with you. May your path be filled with courage, wisdom, and the grace to choose yourself, always. Goodbye, and may you walk forward with strength and peace.